Welcome to Revenge Oath. Tonight we are uncovering a case where a festive glow hid a ruthless killer beneath the smiling faces of carved pumpkins. Your comments mean the world. Tell me where you're watching from today. Now let's follow Holmes into the mystery. Sherlock Holmes and the Pumpkin. Moon murders. On the evening when the moon rose like a burnished sovereign over London's chimneys, Dr. Watson found himself once more at Baker Street, noting, as he often did in those days, how the glow from the sitting-room grate caught for an instant the sharp bridge of Holmes's nose and the reflective gleam in his eyes. He had been in the act of lighting his pipe when a quick, urgent step beat upon the stair, followed by the uncertain scuffle of a second pair of feet, and then a knock whose insistence recommended distress rather than ceremony. Mrs. Hudson ushered in a gentleman of middle years, immaculately dressed but in that disarray of spirit which no tailor can repair, and with him a constable whose helmet was cradled gravely in his hands. The former removed his gloves with movements too deliberate for calm. The latter kept his eyes upon Holmes as a pupil fixes on a master. "You will forgive the hour," the gentleman began, looking from Holmes to the unsettled hearth, "but lives may very well depend upon it. My name is Archibald Penbury, private secretary to His Grace the Duke of Arnsley. There has been a death, another." His voice faltered upon the last word, like a shoe catching at the edge of a step. Holmes indicated a chair without rising. "Set your mind at ease, Mr. Penbury, by giving it employment. You have come from Wapping, not Arnsley House, and recently your cuffs show the grey smear that fine London mist lays upon the lower river at night. You stopped for a telegram and were turned away by a closed wicket. Your right cuff bears the silvered scrape of an iron latch. The constable has been with you no longer than your hansom's last turn. Pray go on." If Penbury's mouth opened, it did so only to close again. It is always perplexing, Watson thought, how the most anxious are reassured by being told that they have been observed. The constable, young, with the solid seriousness of one too new to be cynical, cleared his throat. "Constable Merryweather, sir, out of Leman Street. Inspector Lestrade sent me to fetch Mr. Holmes, if he'd come. Third one in as many weeks." "Third what?" asked Watson. "Third body with the same token, Dr. Watson," Merryweather replied. He glanced at Penbury. "Beg pardon, sir?" Penbury's composed facade slipped at last. "It is the mark, Mr. Holmes, the same damned mark, a circle of orange paint drawn upon the pavement beneath the face, not neat but painstaking, as if some grim child would have it perfect, and in the circle a sign, a little curve like a crescent moon." "Orange paint," Holmes repeated softly, as a musician might test the quality of a single note. He rose, crossed to the mantel, and with the poker lifted a fleck of soot that had fallen upon the marble. "Not grease, not chalk, paint." "House paint, sir," Merryweather said. "There's a tang to it, and the fruit." "Fruit? A pumpkin, sir, or what's left of it. Cut in two and laid beside the head like bookends. No face carved, nothing theatrical, just set there, savaged by a knife." Watson could not help looking at Holmes, who had turned the poker in his fingers until the light crawled along its shaft. The expression he wore, inattention to a casual eye, told those who knew him that his mind had slipped its leash and run ahead. "3 victims, Holmes said. "Where and when?" Merryweather gave the account with an earnestness Watson liked him for. "First was a nightman found near Bishopsgate on the 12th of last month, the harvest moon, the papers called it. Second, a lighterman at Limehouse on the 26th, when the moon was waning. Tonight's is a solicitor, Mr. Julian Fortescue, discovered by the river steps at Wapping Old Stairs at 8:15. all 3 after dark, all with that orange ring, that little crescent drawn inside, and the pumpkin pieces. Nothing taken except, well, it's odd, sir, the right shoe in the first, the left glove in the second, and in tonight's—" He hesitated. "A cufflink, sir, one of a pair, gold with a small chip of green glass." Penbury, who had been gripping his gloves as if they were a drowning man's rope, at last broke in. Mr. Fortescue was a man known to his grace. He handled certain discreet papers for the Arnsley estate. He dined at Arnsley House yesterday at noon. And now, he swallowed. Now this. Watson felt the familiar chill that the word discreet carries when breathed in London's darker corridors. Holmes returned the poker to its brackets and faced our visitors with an air of courtesy that never failed to hearten those in need. "Before we pursue the horror of pumpkins along the river," he said, "help me distinguish the man from the manner of his death. Mr. Penbury, describe Mr. Fortescue." Fortescue was careful, abstemious, without enemies that I know of. He had a fondness for astronomy, carried an almanac in his pocket, and could tell you the moon's rising for any month. Perhaps a harmless affectation, but Penbury's composure faltered again. "I cannot help thinking of that hateful circle and the little moon within." "An almanac," Holmes murmured, "and papers for a duke and a cufflink missing. Was it engraved?" "With a tiny fox's head, Mr. Holmes, Arnsley's crest. His Grace gifted them to certain gentlemen on the completion of, let us say, notable services. Mr. Fortescue earned his pair a year past." Holmes clasped his fingers and regarded the fire as if the answer lay in the coals. "You say the first murder coincided with the harvest moon?" "Yes, sir," Merryweather said. "Night of the big orange moon, like a lantern in the sky." "Orange enough to lend a man a theme," Holmes said. "And the second occurred at the waning?" "Begging your pardon, yes." Holmes's eyes moved to the window and the faint square of mist beyond. "Watson, your hat. Mr. Penbury, you will accompany us as far as Leman Street to provide all necessary introductions and to relieve Inspector Lestrade of the notion that I am indifferent to seasonal showmanship. Constable, if you please, the scene." As Merryweather began to thank him, Holmes raised a hand. "Your gratitude is premature. We do not know yet whether we are confronted with a single murderer or a fashion in vulgar brutality. The circles and fruit might be ornament, clumsy antlers on a stag's head. The head, however, is the thing." While Watson shrugged into his coat, he allowed himself a brief glance at Holmes's violin case in the corner. At these moments, he saw most clearly the twin destinies that hung eternally over his friend, the one that demanded a mind brought to heel by labour, and the other that lured it toward melancholy by boredom. Cases like this, grisly, theatrical, and possibly complex, were the tonic that kept Holmes from the darker pharmacopoeias. We had reached the door when Penbury, in a tone that meant to be casual and failed, added, "There is one more detail, Mr. Holmes. I cannot say whether it bears upon the matter. When Mr. Fortescue took his leave yesterday, he forgot his almanac at Arnsley House. It was found later in the library, open to the page for the present month, where someone, perhaps Fortescue himself, had marked the nights with a pencil cross, the 12th, the 26th, and—" he moistened his lips. "Tonight." Holmes's glance slid toward the corner writing desk. "And yet, Mr. Fortescue went out unprepared for rain. He left in haste or in confidence. A man who marks the nights in advance carries some appointment upon them, whether with the stars or with another man. Did he receive any letter today?" "I do not know," Penbury said. Holmes took up his hat. "Then let us ask the river. It keeps poor counsel, but it keeps it faithfully. The night received us with that damp embrace which makes London seem a city sunk at the bottom of a slow, cold sea. The lamps along Baker Street wavered in the mist, A hansom answered Merryweather's whistle, and we rattled eastward past shuttered shop fronts and the sullen glow of public houses. Holmes said little. When he did speak, it was as if to himself. "Orange paint is seldom carried without purpose," he said, "and pumpkins have short lives once opened. Whoever left those halves wanted them fresh, symbol over stench. The ring and crescent are marks intended to be read, not merely seen. To be read by whom?" Watson ventured that the newspapers would make of them a carnival, and Holmes's mouth drew in that thin line which in our friendship had served as both smile and scowl. "At times," he said, "the press is a conspirator without knowing it. Yet here," and he tapped the floor of the cab with his stick, "here we have a series more consistent than a lunatic's fancy. Note the thefts: a right shoe, a left glove, a single cufflink, not trophies, not even tokens. They are parts that suggest a whole. A man might be assembled from them if one were a grotesque tailor, or—" He stopped, and the idea, whatever it was, went back into the dark. We turned eventually into streets that smelled of rope, tar, and cold iron, and the moon broke from a bank of cloud to lay its pallor upon the river. At Lehman Street, Lestrade met us with that air of determined skepticism which Sherlock Holmes never failed to invite in him. "You see," Lestrade said almost cheerfully, when we told him what we knew, "seasonal rubbish. You'll find the same hand behind it. And that hand belongs to a man who can't keep out of the penny dreadfuls. Come on then, it's down by the steps. We've kept the scene as clean as the public will permit." Holmes sketched a bow that managed to be both courteous and wicked. "Lead, Inspector. There is nothing so refreshing as a night by the river in good company." He looked back once at Penbury. "And you, sir, steel yourself. What you will see is disagreeable. What you will feel afterward, if my guess is sound, will be worse." Thus it was, under the pumpkin-coloured disk of the moon, that we made our way to the Wapping Old Stairs, with the river very quiet at the stone and the city behind us holding its breath, as if the night itself had some appointment it dared not be late for. The fog over Wapping lay thick as wool when we reached the river stairs. A ring of yellow lantern lights swam upon the slick cobbles, and within it several figures moved cautiously, their shapes blurred by the mist. The Thames lapped softly against the steps as though trying to erase what horror had taken place there. Holmes stepped forward without hesitation, his tall figure cutting through the vapour like the prow of a ship. Lestrade, short and brisk as ever, met him with a curt nod. "You've lost no time, Mr. Holmes. Good. I'm half-minded this one may stir your interest, though I'll not have my men chasing ghosts again." Holmes merely inclined his head, his eyes already fixed upon the object at the circle's centre. A man lay on the stones, his coat soaked through, one arm twisted beneath him. A constable's lantern revealed a face smooth and respectable, save for the grey pallor that death bestows upon all. Beside the head, precisely arranged, were the halves of a small pumpkin, their surfaces damp with river mist. And encircling all, a ring of orange paint, bright even in the gloom. Holmes crouched low, touching the ground just beyond the painted line. "You've had the sense not to disturb the circle," he murmured. "Excellent." "None of my doing," said Lestrade. "The fellow who found him, some sailor on shore leave, kept others back until we came. I suppose even drunken men can be superstitious." Holmes drew a small magnifying lens from his pocket and leaned closer. "Fresh," he said softly. "The paint was laid down no more than 2 hours ago. Note the dust trapped beneath the edge. Street grit, not river sand. The killer painted this before moving the body to the spot." I started. "You mean Fortescue was murdered elsewhere?" "Almost certainly, Watson. These stones are damp, but not bloody. The man was carried here by someone of great strength or with assistance. Lestrade frowned. And the pumpkins, Mr. Holmes? That part's got even the reporters guessing. Holmes regarded the pale orange flesh with something approaching curiosity. A grotesque token, Inspector, but not meaningless. You observe the stems have been cleanly severed as by a thin, sharp blade, perhaps a boning knife. They were bought fresh, I would wager, within the last 12 hours. We may learn from where. He turned suddenly to Constable Merriweather. Tell me, my good man, was there any sign of a struggle nearby? No, sir. Just this bit of cloth caught on the stair railing. Looked too fine for the likes of sailors, so I kept it. Holmes took the fragment between finger and thumb. It was silk, dark green with a faint pattern of gilt threads. He held it up to the lamplight and smiled faintly. Excellent. The river lends us its first whisper. He then inspected the corpse itself with clinical precision. From an inner pocket, he withdrew a pair of thin gloves and began his examination. The face shows light bruising along the jaw, strangled, likely, with a narrow cord. No marks of a ring upon the fingers, yet there is an indentation upon the right wrist where a watch chain once rested. It was torn away with force. Watson, note the left cuff, no link. Matching the missing one, I said, recalling the constable's words earlier. Precisely. Holmes leaned back on his heels, eyes narrowed. The thief of such trifles repeats himself too carefully to be a common murderer. There is method here, Inspector. Method! And a certain artistry. Lestrade snorted. Artistry! It's madness! Plain as gaslight! Holmes rose and dusted his knees. Madness, perhaps, but not without rhythm. The nights marked in Fortescue's almanac correspond with the lunar phases, the harvest moon, the waning, and tonight, the pumpkin moon, as some country folk name it. Tell me, Lestrade, do you still have the previous victim's possessions? At the Yard, Lestrade said grudgingly. You'll find them exactly as left. The missing shoe, the glove, and now this blasted cufflink. But if you ask me, we'll find no sense in it. London breeds its share of lunatics. Holmes smiled thinly. And yet lunacy, properly patterned, is only logic misunderstood. He turned to Penbury, who stood some paces back, pale but attentive. Mr. Penbury, you mentioned Fortescue was engaged in discreet matters for the Duke. Can you tell me what nature these papers bore? The secretary hesitated, lowering his voice. Financial, mostly, transfers estate, holdings, and, if I must be honest, correspondence the Duke would not wish discussed. Certain letters from abroad. Holmes's brows rose. Abroad? From where? Italy, Mr. Holmes. Naples, I believe. I know little more than that, save that one letter arrived last week and seemed to trouble Fortescue deeply. Holmes exchanged a look with me, one of those silent flashes I had learned to interpret as a scent caught. Watson, he said briskly, you recall my monograph on handwriting irregularities? We must see that letter. Mr. Penbury, can you arrange access to Fortescue's effects? I can, Penbury said. His lodgings are at Bruton Street. The police sealed them this evening. Then we shall attend to them first thing tomorrow. Holmes drew his coat closer and turned toward the river. In the meantime, Inspector, keep this scene untouched, particularly the paint. I wish to take a sample myself. Lestrade nodded, though unwillingly. As you like, but I'll warn you, the papers will have this as the work of some pagan cult by morning. Pumpkin Moon Murders, they'll call it. Holmes's gaze followed the pale reflection of the moon on the water. They may not be entirely wrong, he said quietly. But if there is a cult, it is not one of worship. It is one of concealment. We left the scene as the tide began to creep upward, soft and slow, licking at the stones like a secret unspoken. The hansom rattled back toward Baker Street through a London grown ghostly under fog. Holmes was silent until we neared Aldgate. "Watson," he said suddenly, "3 deaths, 3 tokens, 3 lunar nights, a right shoe, a left glove, a single cufflink, each item part of a gentleman's attire. Does that not strike you as curious?" I frowned. "Pieces of a whole outfit, yes, but why such selection?" "Exactly the question." Holmes leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "What manner of man collects fragments of other men's dress? Not a common thief. There's no profit in one shoe or glove. No, my dear Watson, this is a message composed in articles of clothing, a puzzle written in fabric and flesh." He sat back, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "The murderer marks the moon's passage not for superstition, but for precision, and there is purpose in his thefts. Tomorrow, when we examine Fortescue's rooms, we shall see whether the stars themselves are complicit or merely witnesses to the hand that kills by their light." The cab wheels splashed through a puddle, scattering silver reflections of the moon. I glanced at Holmes's face in the shifting light, intent, cold, and quietly alive with the thrill of pursuit. Whatever grim logic bound these murders together, I knew the night had already yielded its hook, and Sherlock Holmes would not rest until it was unravelled. Dawn crept reluctantly over London, a thin grey light seeping through the fog like diluted ink through paper. When I awoke, Holmes was already at the window, a faint silhouette against the pale mist. His violin rested on the chair beside him, untouched. Instead, he was studying something through his glass. A small glass vial, half filled, with an amber liquid. "You're up early," I remarked, reaching for my dressing gown. "Not early, Watson. Continuous," he replied without turning. "Sleep is a luxury when one's thoughts are mid-flight. Observe this residue, a sample taken from the painted circle last night. Orange pigment mixed with linseed and a trace of beeswax. House paint, yes, but of a rare composition. Only 2 manufacturers in London use this formula, both catering to artists or theatrical decorators. I intend to call on them presently." He finally turned, his grey eyes sharp, but alive with that peculiar satisfaction that accompanied discovery. "Lestrade will waste his morning with his reporters. We, however, shall waste none of ours." I had learned long ago not to question the velocity of Holmes's reasoning, and soon we were rattling through the awakening city in a hansom cab, the air thick with coal smoke and the smell of wet stone. By the time we reached the Strand, London had shrugged itself awake. Costermongers were shouting, carts clattering, and the fog had thinned to a soft veil. Our first stop was a modest paint supplier near Drury Lane. Holmes presented his card to the proprietor, a timid man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers, then laid the vial on the counter, as if it were evidence in a court of law. "Tell me, Mr. Holt," Holmes said quietly, "have you ever mixed a pigment of this precise tint and texture? A shade between marigold and rust, with a faint, waxed sheen." The man held it up to the light and nodded, surprised. "Indeed, sir, that is a custom order. I prepare it for the Royal Lyceum Theatre. Stage sets, props, that sort of thing. They use it for moonlight effects to catch the gas lamps better." Holmes's mouth curved slightly. "For moonlight effects, you say? Most appropriate. Do you sell it elsewhere?" "No, sir. The recipe was devised for their scene painter, Mr. Carstairs. Odd fellow, but brilliant hand. Comes in twice a month for his supply." "When was he last here?" 4 days ago, Mr. Holmes, preparing for the new autumn production, The Mask of Diana, I think it's called." Holmes pocketed the vial. "You've been most helpful, Mr. Holt. My compliments on your craftsmanship." Back in the cab, Holmes leaned forward, fingers steepled. "You see it, Watson? The connection is theatrical, not merely decorative. A man obsessed with moons, circles, and performance. What better artist than one whose trade is illusion? Do you think this Carstairs could be involved in the murders? I think he understands the symbolism behind them, Holmes replied. Whether he wields the brush or only lends the colour remains to be seen. We reached the Lyceum shortly after 10. The theatre's grand facade loomed over Wellington Street, its gilt lettering dimmed by soot. Inside, the air was thick with the mingled scents of paint, dust and burnt oil. Carpenters were hammering at flats, and from the stage came the echo of a woman rehearsing lines. A short man with a paint-smeared waistcoat appeared from the wings, wiping his hands. "Carstairs?" he said briskly. "If it's about accounts, speak to the office. If it's about art, speak to me." Holmes inclined his head. "It is about art, Mr. Carstairs, or rather about paint." The man squinted at him. "Ah, you're from the police, I take it. I've told them already. I don't sell my mixtures." "Not police," Holmes corrected mildly. "Merely an observer of the curious. Tell me, have you lately painted anything by the river?" Carstairs laughed, showing yellowed teeth. "Good Lord, no. I don't go near the Thames if I can help it. What's this about?" Holmes studied him keenly. 3 murders, each marked with your distinctive pigment. Orange ring, crescent moon. Does that symbol hold any meaning for you? Carstairs' smile faltered. The crescent? Well, he hesitated. That's part of the new production, actually. The Mask of Diana. It's about the goddess of the moon and her hunt. We've been painting symbols, rings, crescents, even pumpkins for the harvest scene. Decorative nonsense, nothing more. Pumpkins, you say? Yes, stage props. The producer wanted authenticity. Autumn festival scenes, that sort of thing. Holmes's gaze sharpened like a knife. And who designed those symbols? Miss Isadora Fenwick, the actress playing Diana. She sketches the stage motifs herself. Very talented young lady, though. Peculiar tastes. Peculiar how? Well, Carstairs said, lowering his voice, she keeps a journal of moon phases, times her rehearsals by them, even wears a little silver crescent around her throat. I've seen her wander the stage at midnight talking about rituals and purity of light. Superstitious sort. But harmless, I think. Holmes's expression was unreadable. Where might I find Miss Fenwick? She's rehearsing just now, or in her dressing room if you'd rather not disturb the company. We thanked Carstairs and made our way along the dim corridor that led to the private rooms. Holmes paused outside one door, its nameplate engraved in neat letters, Miss Isadora Fenwick. He knocked lightly. A voice, low and musical, answered, "Come in." The woman who rose to greet us was of striking presence, tall, dark-haired, her pale complexion heightened by a faintly silver powder. Around her neck hung a pendant shaped as a crescent moon, just as Carstairs described. The light from the window gave her an ethereal glow like a figure painted rather than born. "I fear you have me at a disadvantage, gentlemen," she said, with a faint smile. Holmes bowed. "Forgive the intrusion, Miss Fenwick. My name is Sherlock Holmes. This is my colleague, Dr. Watson. We are inquiring into a matter that touches, perhaps, upon your art." Her dark eyes flickered with interest. "My art?" Holmes gestured toward a sketch pinned to the wall, a charcoal study of a circle and crescent, almost identical to the mark found at the crime scenes. "You drew this?" She looked momentarily startled, then composed herself. "Yes, for the Mask of Diana, but surely that can have nothing to do with whatever it is you're investigating." "That remains to be seen," Holmes said softly. "Do you recall a gentleman named Julian Fortescue?" Her hand froze on the edge of her table. "Fortescue?" she repeated slowly. "Yes. He attended one of our rehearsals last week. A patron of the arts, or so I was told. He wished to sponsor the new production. Holmes's voice was mild, but his gaze never left her face. "And did he meet with you privately?" She hesitated just a fraction too long. "Only briefly. He wished to discuss symbolism, how the moon governs tides, the turning of seasons. He seemed very intense about it." Holmes inclined his head. "Indeed. And did he mention the Duke of Arnsley?" The faint colour drained from her cheeks. "No," she said after a moment. "Not by name." Holmes regarded her silently for several heartbeats, then smiled with that faint courtesy which concealed more than it revealed. "You have been most obliging, Miss Fenwick. I should not detain you longer." As we stepped back into the corridor, I could feel the tension still hanging in the air behind us. "Holmes," I whispered, "do you suspect her?" He adjusted his gloves, eyes distant. "Suspect? No, Watson, but I recognize a player when I see one, and the stage upon which she performs may reach far beyond the Lyceum." Outside, the bells of St. Clement Danes began to chime 11. Holmes hailed a cab with sudden energy. "To Bruton Street, driver," he ordered. "Let us see what ghost of Fortescue still lingers in his rooms. If I am correct, tonight's moon will not be the last to shine upon the murderer's work." The fog was lifting by the time we reached Bruton Street, revealing a thin wash of pale blue sky above the soot-streaked rooftops. The hansom drew to a halt before a tall, narrow building, its facade respectable but worn, the brass number dulled by years of London smoke. Holmes dismissed the driver and surveyed the doorway with that intent stillness of his, as though the very bricks might confess under scrutiny. A constable stood guard by the steps. "Mr. Holmes," he said, straightening, "Inspector Lestrade told us to expect you." He unlocked the door and gestured us inside. The rooms of Julian Fortescue were neat, almost unnaturally so. A faint scent of tobacco lingered, mingled with the wax of extinguished candles. Everything spoke of restraint, a man who prized order and discretion. Yet beneath that surface lay unease. One could feel it in the silence, as though the air itself held its breath. Holmes began his survey at once. His gaze moved swiftly, his touch light, as he examined the writing desk, the fireplace, the scattered papers. "Observe, Watson, the ash upon the grate is from 3 different tobaccos, yet only one pipe stands upon the mantel. Fortescue entertained visitors recently, and at least one of them smoked heavily. The ashes differ in composition, one coarse and Turkish, the other fine and domestic. The last is a pale flake, French origin, rarely found outside artistic circles. Curious." He crossed to a small cabinet and opened it, revealing a collection of objects: a silver compass, a brass spyglass, and a small astronomical chart pinned within. "Our solicitor's passion for the heavens was more than idle fancy," he murmured. "Here, see the markings. He's charted the lunar cycles of the last 3 months, but the last entry stops abruptly 3 nights ago. The ink is still wet enough to take a thumbprint." I leaned closer. Beside the chart lay a slip of paper, half tucked beneath the compass. Holmes drew it free and smoothed it on the desk. It was a note written in an elegant, looping hand. "When the crescent wanes, the veil is lifted. Bring the token to the water, as promised. Midnight. I.F." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "I.F. Isadora Fenwick, Our Lady of the Lyceum, has been less than candid." "Then she lured him to his death?" I asked. "Possibly, though not necessarily by intent. This letter may have served as bait rather than invitation. There is artifice here, an intellect directing the pattern from behind the curtain." He folded the paper carefully. "We must not confront Miss Fenwick yet. Let her believe we remain ignorant." He turned to the small escritoire by the window. "Now here's something still more interesting. Look at this drawer. It resists slightly when opened. A false base, I think." Producing his penknife, he pried gently beneath the panel until it lifted with a soft snap. Within lay several sealed envelopes, each bearing the crest of the Duke of Arnsley. Holmes examined the wax closely. "Unbroken," he murmured. Fortescue kept them hidden even from his employer. "What secrets were you nursing, my good sir?" He slipped one open, using the edge of his knife to preserve the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper filled with figures, names, and references to foreign accounts. Naples, Trieste, Palermo. Holmes scanned it, his brows knitting. As I suspected, financial maneuvers of a distinctly delicate nature. The Duke's dealings abroad are neither wholly legal nor wholly discreet. If these papers were to reach the wrong hands, His Grace would find himself in grave difficulty. This, Watson, gives motive enough for blackmail and perhaps for murder. At that moment, footsteps echoed in the hall. The constable appeared in the doorway. "Beg pardon, sir, but a messenger's just arrived, said to deliver this straight to Mr. Fortescue's address." Holmes took the envelope. It was unmarked, sealed with black wax. He broke it open. Inside was a single card upon which were scrawled 5 words in bold ink. "One link short of completion." Holmes read it twice, his lips tightening. Completion, the missing link. 3 deaths, 3 tokens, each one a fragment of a gentleman's attire, and now this, implying another to come. Our murderer considers his work incomplete. "Then he means to strike again," I said. "Undoubtedly. And soon." Holmes moved swiftly now, his thoughts alight. He gathered the note from Miss Fenwick, the Duke's letters, and the new message, tucking them into his coat. "We must return to Baker Street at once. There is a pattern here, Watson, and patterns have music if one listens closely enough. The right shoe, the left glove, the cufflink, each from a man of standing, each bearing subtle connection to the Duke of Arnsley. The missing items, perhaps not trophies, but keys." As we left, I caught one last look at Fortescue's empty chair, the pipe upon the mantel, the ghost of order in the room. It seemed almost indecent to leave such careful silence behind. Back at Baker Street, Holmes spread the evidence across the table. The orange pigment vial, the letters, the ash samples, the cryptic notes. The room filled with the rhythm of his pacing, the scratch of his pen, the clink of glass as he mixed a small chemical test. I waited in patient bewilderment until he finally spoke. "Watson, imagine for a moment that our murderer believes himself an artist, each crime a stroke upon some greater canvas. What if the attire of his victims is part of that design? The right shoe from the first, the left glove from the second, the cufflink from the third. What completes the symmetry?" I frowned. "A left shoe, a right glove, the other cufflink?" "Precisely. He seeks to construct an ensemble, a gentleman completed piece by piece from the dead. A grotesque mimicry of refinement. But why?" He stopped abruptly, his gaze fixed on the vial of paint. "Because the act is not of rage, but of ritual. The circle, the crescent, the lunar calendar, it is ceremony. The killer stages his art under the guise of worship. Yet worship of what?" The answer, it seemed, hovered just beyond his reach. He struck a match and lit a cigarette, the smoke curling like thought itself. "The next moon rises tomorrow night, first quarter. If the murderer follows his own rhythm, he will strike again before dawn. We must discover where." I looked at the letter from Isadora Fenwick. "The river," I said quietly. She wrote, "Bring the token to the water." Each body was found by the Thames. Holmes's eyes brightened. "Excellent, Watson. The river is the stage, the moon his lamp. He kills not at random but by geography. Each site equidistant, along the lower Thames like points upon an arc. Trace the line from Bishopsgate to Limehouse to Wapping. and you will see the curve continues westward toward Blackfriars. He seized his map, marking each location with swift precision. There! Blackfriars Bridge, the final point in the sequence. That is where the last act must unfold. He turned to me, his expression grave, yet invigorated. We have one night, Watson, one night to prevent the completion of this lunatic's masterpiece. And if fortune favors us, we may yet learn who stands behind the mask of the pumpkin moon. Evening descended with the slow inevitability of a curtain fall, and Baker Street filled with the warm glow of lamplight against the gathering fog. Holmes had been pacing since the late afternoon, his movements as precise and restless as the ticking of the clock upon the mantel. Every so often he stopped to glance at the map spread before him, its surface marked by 3 neat red circles and a 4th, drawn faintly in pencil, over Blackfriars Bridge. "The pattern is unbroken," he murmured half to himself. 3 points in rhythm, each 2 weeks apart, each beneath the same moon's progression. The next must fall tonight. Our artist will not allow his composition to remain unfinished. I set down my cup. Then we must be there before him. Holmes smiled faintly. "You recall, Watson, how the trap must be set before the prey knows it is being hunted. We shall go, but not as ourselves. The murderer observes he must have done so. The victims were not random wanderers. Each man was chosen, drawn into the net by promise or persuasion. We must therefore offer him another lure." I looked up sharply. "You mean bait?" "Precisely," said Holmes. "You shall accompany me, of course, but as the observer this time. I, however, must play the role the killer expects." "And what role is that?" He lifted from the table one of the letters taken from Fortescue's desk, the one bearing the Duke's crest. "A gentleman of distinction, carrying secrets worth silencing. If our murderer collects pieces of refinement, then I shall give him a full ensemble to covet." He reached for his Inverness coat, then paused, eyes glinting with mischief. "But first, a disguise. No hunter steps into his quarry's path without altering the scent." Within half an hour, Holmes had transformed himself. Gone was the familiar sharpness of his features, replaced by the softer dignity of a man of letters. Grey at the temples, a faint scholarly stoop, a cane polished from use. Only his eyes, quick and dangerous as ever, betrayed the mind beneath. Lestrade arrived not long after dusk, grim and unconvinced. "You're certain of this, Holmes? Blackfriars is no place for theatrics. We can have constables stationed every 20 yards. Holmes waved the suggestion aside. "Too visible. The murderer is cautious, Inspector, not foolhardy. A single uniform in the wrong shadow will frighten him off. No, Watson and I will be sufficient. You may position your men at a distance, near the bridge's western approach. If I am correct, the killer will strike between midnight and 1. Lestrade frowned, but agreed. "If you're wrong, I'll be writing the report over your bodies." Holmes's lips twitched. "Then let us spare you the paperwork." By 11 the fog had thickened again, swirling in slow drifts over the Thames. We took our place beneath one of the gas lamps midway along the bridge. The light flickered upon the damp stones, throwing long, spectral shapes into the mist. Holmes leaned upon the parapet, his coat collar turned up, a figure of solitary dignity. I stood a few paces away, revolver concealed beneath my cloak. The only sound was the slow lap of water and the occasional distant rattle of carriage wheels. Minutes passed. The city seemed to hold its breath. At last, from the shroud of fog ahead came the soft scrape of a boot upon stone. Holmes did not move. Another step followed, and then a third. A shape emerged, a man in dark clothing, carrying something long and thin in one hand. I tensed, but Holmes lifted a finger ever so slightly, warning me to stay still. The man approached slowly, his face half hidden beneath a low-brimmed hat. When he was within 10 yards, he stopped. His voice, when he spoke, was oddly calm. "You've come then? I wasn't certain you'd received the message." Holmes's reply was equally measured. One does not ignore an unfinished arrangement. The stranger inclined his head. "Good. Then you understand what must be completed. It is not cruelty, it is symmetry." I took a cautious step forward, my hand closing around the revolver's grip. The man turned toward the river, and for the first time I saw what he carried, a small painter's satchel. He set it down with care and withdrew a brush, its bristles stiff with dried pigment. From his coat he produced a jar of paint, the same orange hue we had seen before, and knelt to begin drawing a circle upon the stones. Holmes's voice came low and almost pitying. "You do your work with devotion, Mr. Carstairs." The painter froze, his head lifted sharply, and I saw the madness in his eyes, bright, feverish, alive with terrible conviction. "You shouldn't know that name." "I know much more," Holmes said quietly. "You are not the artist you pretend to be, but the servant of another's vision, the hand, not the mind. Who directs you? Who conceived the design?" Carstairs rose slowly, the brush trembling in his fingers. "She did," he whispered. "The moon's priestess, the one who sees beyond the veil. She said the cycle must be perfect. 4 souls, 4 tokens. When the circle closes, the moon will shine pure again." "Miss Isadora Fenwick," said Holmes. Carstairs' lips curved in something between worship and terror. "She's not to be touched. You don't understand. I only make her vision real." Holmes took one measured step closer. "And tonight's victim?" The man's eyes flicked toward him, then past him, to me. The realization struck me like cold water. "You," he said softly. Before I could move, he flung the jar. It shattered near my feet, spilling orange paint across the stones. Holmes lunged, but Carstairs darted sideways, quick as a rat, vanishing into the mist toward the river steps. I fired once, the report echoing against the bridge, but the fog swallowed him whole. Holmes seized my arm. "No pursuit. He'll know the alleys better than we do. Let Lestrade's men take him when he reaches the embankment." He turned sharply toward the parapet, scanning the river. "He's been conditioned, set loose like a hound. The true master remains at liberty." A whistle cut through the night, Lestrade's signal. We hurried toward the western end, where 2 constables were dragging a struggling figure from the river's edge. It was Carstairs, soaked, raving, his hands stained orange to the wrist. Holmes crouched beside him. "Where is she, Carstairs? Where is Isadora Fenwick?" The painter's gaze fixed on the moon above, now bright and sharp through the thinning fog. "She's gone to finish it," he whispered. "The circle must close. The moon must have her reflection." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Reflection? The final act?" "Watson, the theatre. Tonight's rehearsal. She will perform her finale not on stage, but in blood." He rose abruptly, his voice a whip of command. "Lestrade, leave 2 men here and bring the rest to the Lyceum. If we are not too late, we may yet prevent the curtain from falling on a corpse." We ran through the gaslit streets, the wheels of Lestrade's carriage clattering behind us, the cold night air slicing our breath. Somewhere ahead, beyond the fog and the echoing bells, the moon hung low and orange over London, its light like an omen, waiting for the final stroke of the pumpkin moon's design. The cab wheels thundered over the cobblestones as we raced toward the Lyceum. The streets were nearly deserted, save for the occasional drunkard or night watchman who turned to stare as we passed, startled by the speed and fury of our progress. Holmes sat rigid beside me, his gaze fixed through the window, his jaw tight. The lamplight flickered across his face, throwing deep shadows beneath his cheekbones. He spoke only once during the drive, his voice low and precise, every syllable sharpened by urgency. "She will not flee, Watson. That is not her nature. She is a performer, a creature of audience and attention. She will stage her act beneath the gaze of the world, not in hiding. The theatre is her temple and the moon her spotlight. If she means to complete the circle, she will do it there." Lestrade, sitting opposite, checked his revolver with grim efficiency. "If she's half as mad as that painter, she'll not go." Quietly. Holmes didn't answer. His mind was already elsewhere, arranging motives and patterns like chess pieces on an unseen board. The city roared past us, the gas lamps blurring into streaks of gold through the fog. When we arrived, the theatre loomed over us, its grand facade shrouded in darkness. The posters for the Mask of Diana fluttered in the cold breeze, images of a moon goddess with a silver bow and a circle of light at her feet. A cruel irony, given what we knew now. The main doors were locked, but a dim light showed from within. Holmes motioned for silence and led the way around to the stage entrance. The back alley smelled of paint, damp wood, and smoke. A faint hum drifted from inside, something between a whispered chant and the hum of machinery. Holmes tested the handle. It turned. We entered. The corridor beyond was narrow and dim, lined with discarded props and costumes hanging like limp phantoms. Somewhere deeper within, a voice rose, soft, melodic, chilling. Isadora Fenwick was singing. The sound carried through the still air, with the clarity of madness disguised as art. Holmes gestured for Lestrade to circle to the front with 2 constables while we advanced along the backstage passage. The boards creaked underfoot. Ahead, through the faint glow of stage lanterns, I could see the open expanse of the stage itself, and at its center, Isadora. She was dressed in flowing silver robes that shimmered under the gaslight. Her hair, unbound, fell about her shoulders like black silk. Around her, the floor was painted with a vast orange circle, the same hue we had seen at every murder site. Within it, the crescent moon symbol gleamed wetly. She had just finished painting it. Before her lay an object draped in cloth. Holmes's hand tightened on my arm. "The missing piece," he murmured. We stepped closer, staying in shadow. She raised her face to the ceiling, to the great stained skylight above that allowed the real moon to shine faintly through. Her voice grew stronger. "4 for the moon," she said. 4 to balance the heavens, the river, the bridge, the light, and now the stage." Holmes stepped into the light. "A perfect performance, Miss Fenwick, but your final act is cancelled." She turned slowly, her expression serene, almost beatific. "Mr. Holmes," she said softly, as though greeting an expected guest. "You came after all. Then you understand the symmetry must be completed. The world must be made whole again." "I understand only that you have driven a man to murder," Holmes replied. "Carstairs believed himself your instrument, the brush to your design, but it was your hand that guided him and your madness that gave him purpose." Her smile faltered for the first time. "Madness? You think this is madness? You who see patterns in dust and ash? You of all men should know the world is order, not chaos. I have merely revealed its geometry." Holmes advanced, his tone unyielding. "And in that geometry, 3 men lie dead. The 4th lies here, I presume?" He nodded toward the shrouded form at her feet. With slow grace, she drew the cloth away. Beneath it lay a mannequin dressed in fragments, the right shoe, the left glove, the single cufflink. the missing pieces from the victims. The face was painted white, serene and empty. "Behold," she whispered, "the reflection of perfection. When the moon rises, I will breathe life into him. He will walk beneath her light as the embodiment of harmony." "Or as the monument to your delusion," Holmes said sharply. "The moon needs no worship from the deranged. Step away from that circle." But she only looked up, eyes shining. "You cannot stop it now. The moon is high, the veil is open." At that instant, the skylight above shuddered. A gust of cold air swept through the theatre as the moon broke fully from the clouds, spilling its silver light upon the stage. Isadora raised her arms, her silver gown blazing in its reflection. Holmes moved swiftly, crossing the circle before she could react. He seized her wrist just as she lifted a small knife from the floor, a thin, sharp stage dagger, real steel among the props. She struggled fiercely, her voice a low cry. "You cannot stop creation." "Creation?" Holmes hissed. "You have only painted death." Lestrade burst through the main doors with his men, their boots pounding against the boards. The spell broke. Isadora went limp, her voice falling into silence as Lestrade's constables restrained her. The knife clattered to the ground, its edge catching the moonlight before rolling harmlessly into shadow. Holmes released her slowly, his breath controlled, though his eyes burned with fierce light. "The performance is over," he said. She looked up at him, her calmness returning like a tide. "You think you've ended it, Mr. Holmes, but she will rise again. The moon never dies." Holmes regarded her for a long moment before turning away. "And yet even the brightest moon fades at dawn." Lestrade barked orders and the constables led her out. The great theatre fell quiet except for the faint hiss of gaslight and the rustle of Holmes's steps as he crossed back to the center of the painted circle. He crouched beside the mannequin, examining it with the detached curiosity of a scientist. "A grotesque effigy," he murmured, "yet not without artistry. Each fragment fitted precisely to its counterpart. She meant to complete him tonight, one token for each phase of the moon. The fourth item would have been mine, no doubt, had Carstairs succeeded." I felt a chill crawl along my spine. "Then she meant to kill you?" Holmes smiled faintly. "An honourable choice of subject, perhaps, but an inconvenient one for her." He rose and brushed the dust from his coat. "There will be no fifth token, Watson. The pumpkin moon has waned." Outside, dawn was beginning to break, the first grey light filtering through the fog. We stepped into the street just as the bells of St. Martin's struck 5. Holmes paused beneath the fading stars, his expression thoughtful rather than triumphant. "There is a certain poetry in her madness," he said quietly. "The painter, the performer, the stage, all instruments of one delusion, yet the pattern was flawless until reason intruded. It is a curious thing, Watson, how genius and insanity sometimes share the same geometry." He drew his coat closer and began to walk toward Baker Street, his voice drifting back through the thinning mist. "Come, my dear fellow, there is still time for breakfast. And perhaps," he added with that dry smile I knew so well, "for you to write your own account before the newspapers turn this into another legend of lunacy under the moon." And so, as the last vestige of night dissolved into pale daylight, I followed him home, Holmes already lost in thought, and London, as ever, indifferent to the mysteries it had witnessed in the hours before dawn. The events of that night lingered with me long after we returned to Baker Street. Though Holmes appeared outwardly composed, I could see that his mind remained ensnared by the lingering threads of the affair. The fire burned low, casting restless shadows upon the walls, while Holmes sat before it with the peculiar stillness that followed his moments of triumph, a stillness not of contentment, but of calculation. "She was not lying, Watson," he said at last, without turning. "At least, not entirely." I looked up from my notes. "Not lying? You mean Miss Fenwick's ravings about the moon and her so-called reflection?" "Precisely. Beneath her delusion lies a truth, distorted but not fabricated. We assumed she orchestrated these murders as a performance of ritualistic madness. But I fear, my dear fellow, that she was herself a pawn, a more refined instrument than Carstairs, but no less directed." I stared at him in disbelief. "Another hand behind them? Holmes, the woman practically confessed. We caught her with the very symbols she designed." He smiled faintly, tapping the arm of his chair. "Ah, confession is a curious thing, Watson. It satisfies the listener far more than it clarifies the truth. Did you not find it odd that she spoke of the 4 souls to balance the heavens? Yet there were but 3 actual deaths. The 4th, her supposed creation, was never meant to live nor to die. The language is wrong. She did not speak as a killer. She spoke as a believer." He rose abruptly and began pacing. "Belief implies persuasion, and persuasion requires a persuader." I frowned. "You think someone convinced her of this lunar nonsense?" "Not nonsense, Watson. Architecture." He reached for the map, still lying upon the table, tracing the 4 marked locations with his fingertip. "The killings formed an arc. The theatre would have completed it. But look here, if we extend the line, beyond it converges upon a single district." He drew a line swiftly across the map until it ended upon the banks of the river near Millbank. "There stands the Duke of Arnsley's London residence." I felt the air tighten around us. "Then you mean His Grace himself?" "I mean," said Holmes, "that coincidences of geometry seldom occur in crime. The Duke's name recurred too often. Fortescue, his solicitor, Penbury, his secretary, and even our poor painter, employed through theatrical contracts bearing his patronage. Consider it, Watson, an artist supplied with the paint, a performer inspired by lunar law, both linked to the same noble household." "But the Duke," I protested, "a man of such standing to direct murder. It seems impossible." "Impossible, yes," Holmes murmured, "and therefore likely. The truest crimes, my dear Watson, are those committed under the cloak of respectability." He stopped pacing, his face hardening in thought. "We must pay the Duke a visit, not as accusers, but as guests. I believe Mr. Penbury will facilitate our call. After all, he was the first to bring the matter to my door. The question is whether he did so from fear or obedience." By noon, we were bound once more toward the west, the carriage cutting through the bustling thoroughfares of Mayfair, until we reached the stately facade of Arnsley House. Its windows gleamed like a row of cold eyes, and the stone steps seemed too polished for any honest tread. Penbury received us in the drawing-room, his expression a mixture of anxiety and fatigue. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, this is most irregular. His Grace is indisposed, deeply shaken by these dreadful events. Might I inquire as to the purpose of your visit?" Holmes's tone was courteous but implacable. "You may, sir. It concerns the papers hidden in Mr. Fortescue's desk, the Duke's letters, and the financial accounts relating to his Neapolitan ventures. Perhaps you can enlighten us as to why a solicitor entrusted with such secrets should have met so violent an end." Penbury paled visibly. "You found those letters?" "Indeed," said Holmes, "and I suspect others exist, copies perhaps, or drafts of the same. Mr. Fortescue may have withheld them as leverage, a prudent move, though fatal in the end. Tell me, Mr. Penbury, did you ever accompany the Duke to Naples?" Penbury hesitated. His fingers twitched against the edge of his waistcoat. Once, yes, years ago, for a charitable investment, a vineyard. Holmes's gaze sharpened. Charity rarely pays in coin, Mr. Pembury, but it does often pay in silence. Do not mistake me. I accuse you of nothing yet. The door opened then, and a tall, gaunt figure entered. The Duke himself. His hair was white, but his bearing carried a soldier's discipline. His eyes, however, were sharp and watchful. "Mr. Holmes," he said, his tone coldly courteous, "I was informed of your arrival. I trust this intrusion bears purpose." Holmes bowed slightly. "A grim purpose, Your Grace. It concerns the recent murders, those which, I fear, are tied most uncomfortably to your household." The Duke's lips thinned. "You overstep, sir." "Not at all," Holmes replied evenly. "You see, every victim served your interests in some manner. Mr. Fortescue, your legal confidant, Mr. Harker, the lighterman who managed your private shipments from Italy, and Mr. Dean, the nightman who tended the very warehouses where those shipments were received. Each man dead, each connected, each symbolically marked with your crest, the fox's head. A curious coincidence, is it not?" For a moment, the Duke said nothing. Then, with remarkable calm, he crossed to the mantel and poured himself a measure of brandy. "You suggest I command murder, Mr. Holmes. I might almost admire the audacity." Holmes studied him. "I suggest only that your secrets are of such weight that others have died to preserve them. Miss Fenwick and Mr. Carstairs were but tools, guided by an unseen hand. Their faith was genuine, but their purpose was not divine, it was economic." The Duke swirled his glass. "Economic?" "Indeed," Holmes said quietly. "Your Neapolitan vineyards, as you call them, are a convenient front. In truth, they conceal a lucrative trade in rare antiquities, objects smuggled through the river docks under the guise of imported goods. Fortescue knew perhaps too much. The markings at the murder scenes were not merely symbolic. They mimicked the seals found upon the crates of your shipments. Painted moons, crescents, rings, the insignia of the shipping consortium you command." The Duke's composure slipped for an instant, no more than the twitch of a hand. It was enough. "You mistake artistic devotion for criminal enterprise," he said coolly. "A dangerous error." Holmes inclined his head. "Then you will not object if I have the warehouses at Millbank examined by Scotland Yard?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Pembury made a sound, a dry, strangled gasp. "Your Grace," he whispered, "perhaps it is best—" "Silence!" the Duke snapped, the mask of nobility cracking at last. "You fool! You should never have brought them here." Holmes moved with startling swiftness. "Watson, the door!" he cried. But before I could block it, Pembury had bolted, panic lending him speed. We heard the crash of glass from the corridor, a window shattered, boots on stone, the frantic echo of retreat. Holmes turned to the Duke, his expression like steel. "Your Grace, the noose tightens. Your secretary knows the truth, and fear will drive him faster than guilt. If he reaches those warehouses before we do, we may find neither him nor the evidence still standing." The Duke said nothing. His glass trembled once, then fell, shattering upon the hearth. Holmes snatched his hat and revolver. "Come, Watson. The stage is not yet dark. Our final act waits by the river." The carriage thundered through the streets like a beast pursued, the lamps blurring past in pale gold streaks. Holmes sat forward, his face carved in grim concentration, while I clutched the seat to steady myself as we turned sharply toward the river. The air was damp and heavy. The fog rolled low along the embankment, wrapping the world in silence. Somewhere ahead, Pembury was running for his life, or for something worse. "He'll go to ground at Millbank," Holmes said. The warehouses by the water. The Duke's empire hides beneath their roof, and Penbury will seek either refuge or destruction. A desperate man rarely distinguishes between the two. When we arrived, the river stretched before us, sluggish and gleaming under the last light of the moon. The row of warehouses stood like sleeping giants along the quay, their windows black, their doors bolted. Yet one building, larger, newer, showed a faint glow from within. Holmes leapt from the carriage before it halted and motioned for silence. We advanced along the wall until we found a side door slightly ajar. Inside, the faint smell of oil and seawater mingled with something sharper, the metallic tang of fresh paint. A lantern burned upon a crate at the far end of the room, its light falling upon stacks of wooden boxes marked with foreign seals. One of them had been pried open, and from its straw packing gleamed the pale curve of an ancient marble statue, its face half buried, its expression eerily serene. "Smuggled antiquities," Holmes murmured, "the Duke's sacred relics of commerce, and yet—" He stopped. A sound echoed from above, the quick shuffle of footsteps along the lofted walkway. Penbury appeared at the railing, his features wild and pale in the lamplight. "Stay back," he cried. "I won't be dragged down for him. You don't understand. He made us believe it was for England, for art, for preservation, but it was greed, his, not ours." Holmes stepped into the open. "Mr. Penbury, you are mistaken if you think I intend harm. It is truth I pursue, not vengeance." "Truth?" Penbury's laugh was brittle. "The truth will hang us all. Carstairs was meant to silence the weak. When he faltered, she, Miss Fenwick, was used. She thought herself chosen, but it was all staged. Every stroke of the brush, every corpse by the river, arranged to draw eyes away from this." He kicked at the crate beside him, sending shards of marble clattering to the floor. "A convenient lunacy. The pumpkin moon was his mask." Before Holmes could answer, another voice echoed from the shadows below. "Enough, Penbury!" The Duke of Arnsley stepped into the lantern's glow, his overcoat immaculate, his walking cane gleaming. There was no sign of surprise in his face, only cold finality. "You've said enough. I had hoped you possessed the sense to remain silent." "Your Grace," Holmes said evenly, "it appears your web has at last revealed its centre." The Duke regarded him with an icy smile. "Mr. Holmes, I underestimated you. A mistake I seldom make twice." He turned sharply toward Penbury. "You brought this upon yourself. You were a servant, not a conscience. I built an empire that stretched from London to Naples, and you weep for a few unfortunate accidents." "They were men!" Penbury shouted, voice cracking. "Not accidents, murdered because they hesitated to obey." The Duke's expression hardened. "Weakness cannot be tolerated in such matters. You were no different, only quicker to betray." He raised his cane, and in that instant I saw the glint of a revolver concealed within its shaft. Holmes moved like lightning, seizing my arm and pulling me aside just as the weapon discharged. The shot rang out, ricocheting off the metal beams. Penbury staggered, clutching his shoulder, but before the Duke could fire again, Holmes struck. With one swift motion he kicked over a crate, the heavy lid crashing against the Duke's legs and sending him sprawling. The revolver clattered to the floor. Lestrade and two constables burst through the door at that moment, having followed our trail from the cab. The Duke was on his knees when they seized him, his mask of authority shattered at last. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "You think the law touches men like me?" Holmes stooped to retrieve the fallen cane. "Oh, I think it will, Your Grace," he said quietly. "Not because of wealth, but because of vanity. You wished your crimes to appear as art, and art always leaves a signature. The paint, the symbols, the geometry of your design. It was too meticulous to escape attention. In the end, you betrayed yourself through precision. The Duke stared at him, the fight fading from his eyes. You understand nothing of power. On the contrary, Holmes replied. I understand it well enough to recognize its decay. Lestrade hauled the Duke to his feet, reading him his charge in clipped tones, while a second constable bound Penbury's wound and led him away. I turned to Holmes, who was studying the crates with quiet fascination. He lifted one fragment of marble, brushing away the straw to reveal an ancient relief carved with crescents and rings, the same motif that had adorned the painted circles of the murders. So that was the origin, I said. The symbol the painter used, the moon, the circle, it all came from these relics. Indeed, Holmes said softly. Arnsley appropriated the imagery of antiquity to dress his crimes in mysticism. He believed himself a custodian of history, yet acted only as its thief. Miss Fenwick's ritual was a pantomime crafted to mislead. Her devotion twisted to disguise the trail of his corruption. We stepped outside into the first light of dawn. The fog had thinned, revealing the slow sweep of the Thames. Holmes paused at the edge of the quay, lighting a cigarette. The smoke drifted upward, mingling with the morning mist. It is always the same, Watson, he said. The grandest deceptions rely upon faith. Carstairs believed in his art, Miss Fenwick in her goddess, and Penbury in his master. Yet behind them all stood a man who believed only in himself. Power, cloaked in mystery, is the most dangerous illusion of all. He flicked the ash into the water and turned toward me with that familiar half-smile. But even illusions, when examined under proper light, cast shadows that reveal their shape. That, my dear fellow, is the detective's true moon, cold, clear, and utterly unforgiving. As we walked back toward the waiting cab, the bells of Westminster began to toll. The mist glowed faintly gold, and for the first time in many nights, the sky above London was free of clouds. Behind us, the pumpkin moon faded with the dawn, its work undone, its circle broken. And though Holmes would never admit it, I fancied I saw a flicker of satisfaction, quiet and fleeting, cross his face, as if the balance of reason had, once more, been restored to the world.